comes into your mind when I say the word peace? Maybe it's an event. Maybe it's a feeling. Maybe it's a place. Maybe it's a person. When was the last time that you experienced peace? When you walked in here tonight? Did you have it? You have it now? What about this notion of peace on the earth? What does that even mean? Is it possible? Do you long for it? You can open up your eyes. About 2,500 years ago, there was a Greek playwright named Aristophanes, and he wrote an anti-war play called Peace. And it was basically written as a critique of the politics of his time. Here's basically what happens. There's a war going on, and there's politicians who stand to make money from that war. So they run the Greek goddess of peace out of town. Her name's Irene. And they lock her up in a cave. She's locked in a cave by the Greek god of war. So there's a regular Greek guy, a guy like you or me, and he decides he needs to have some answers for this. So he travels up to heaven in order to confront the gods about this war. And what he finds when he arrives is that the gods don't care. They've all left the building. None of them are interested in preserving peace or rescuing peace. And so he's kind of left to do it on his own. And so that's what he does. He goes and he rescues peace from this cave, and he kind of restores her to her former place. And the play ends with everybody just enjoying the simple life in the countryside. The question that play raises is a question that people have been asking throughout all of history, which is, where is peace? Where is peace? And that's a question that Aristophanes and his countrymen continued to ask, because the war that he was critiquing with this play, the war that he thought was over, the Peloponnesian War, it went on to last for 17 more years. You might have heard of the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a award that's given every year since 1901 to the person on earth who does the most, in the committee's opinion, to advocate for peace. The inscription on it reads, when translated, "For the peace and brotherhood of men." Yet, the man whose name it bears, Alfred Nobel, was once described in a newspaper as the man who had made it possible to kill more people more quickly than any man who had ever lived. Why, do you ask? Well, because Alfred Nobel owned over 100 explosive manufacturing plants, and he personally invented nitroglycerine detonators, smokeless gunpowder, and dynamite. After World War I, which was thought to be the war to end all wars, after it was over, the League of Nations was established to promote and preserve peace throughout the world. Well, that failed. Do you know how we know that? Because there was a World War II. Okay, when World War II was over, they said, let's do this again. And so they formed something called the United Nations. 15 years after the United Nations was formed, USSR gifted the United Nations with this statue here. It's called Let Us Beat Our Swords into Plowshares. We'll talk about where that came from in just a second. That's a sculpture there of a man with a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other. And he's taking that tool that's used for war and he's beating it into something that's used to be productive for humanity, something that's for the benefit of mankind. That's the purpose of the statue. So it stands there today on the grounds of the United Nations as a reminder of their mission, which is to promote peace and maintain peace in the world. Yet since its inception, the UN has year after year after year approved and provided soldiers for conflict after conflict after conflict, because unfortunately, maintaining peace often requires warfare. In 1958, there was a guy who said, I'm going to come up with a symbol for peace. And so he used the flag positions for N and D, which stands for nuclear disarmament. He came up with this symbol that you're probably familiar with. Unfortunately, he also inadvertently recreated a symbol that the Romans, the Nazis, and the occult have used for the exact opposite purpose. And that pretty much summarizes all of our human efforts to try to advocate for and promote peace through human efforts. Though all of us long for it, though all of us want it, it seems elusive. Like we can't grab a hold of it. Yet here we are, it's Christmas Eve, 16 minutes until midnight, and we're singing songs about love. We're singing songs about joy. We're singing songs about hope, songs about peace. And there's something about this night when we're all gathered together, singing, anticipating this next morning, where these actually feel like real things, don't they? And that's because, according to the story the Bible tells, they are. In the beginning, God created everything, and it was good. It was whole. It was functional. It all worked just the way that he designed it to work. As you saw in the video, the word for that is shalom. It's the interweaving of all the things God created in harmony with each other because they're all in harmony with God. So like the organ analogy from the video, shalom is a system in which everything works just the right way, the way that it was designed. But what happens, engineers, what happens, doctors, when you introduce dysfunction into any given system, whether it's a car engine or a pipe organ or a human body? Well, it starts to break down. That system begins to not be able to do the things that it was designed to do. The biblical story calls that dysfunction that enters the system sin. And you and I have been participating in it, haven't we? So as floods into the world, this thing called sin does, as humans try to live independently of their creator. We break the system. Humans broke the system. But God was never satisfied with his creation being broken. He couldn't let it stay broken. Do you know why? Because he never wanted our relationships to break. He never wanted our marriages to fall apart. He never wanted us to be on a bunch of anxiety medications. He never wanted us to be unwanted or unloved, or at least to feel that way. He never wanted us to feel alone. He never wanted us to experience the pain of losing someone that we love. He never wanted us to be overwhelmed by our shame or paralyzed by our fear or consumed by our anger. So he set a rescue plan in motion, a way of bringing shalom back to his creation, and he started promising people that it was coming. And here's what some of those promises sounded like. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace. Sounds good, doesn't it? He will establish and uphold his kingdom with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. And he will judge between many peoples and render decisions for mighty distant nations. This will sound familiar. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation won't lift up sword against other nation, and never again will they train for war. That sounds pretty good. I'll send down plenty of rain in season, showers of blessing. The trees in the orchard, they'll bear fruit. The ground will produce. They'll feel content and safe in their land. And they'll realize that I'm God when I break them out of their slavery and rescue them from their slave masters. No longer will they be exploited by outsiders and ravaged by fierce beasts. They'll live safe and sound, fearless and free. Sounds really good, doesn't it? He'll bring peace to the nations. His realm will stretch from sea to sea, all the way to the ends of the earth. So we get this picture that there will be a king that is going to come to restore peace. Now, the surprising twist in the story is kind of a spoiler alert if you don't know this, but that king that would come is actually God himself. Now, the Chronicles of Narnia, some of you have read that. How many of you? 4. Cool. It's God's story, essentially in fairy tale form. And the metaphor that it used to describe this whole thing is wonderful. We've been using it throughout this whole series, our Advent series. So in the second book, Aslan, who's the lion who created Narnia, he hasn't been seen or heard from for many, many years. And there's a wicked ice queen who's ruling in his place. And she has exploited the people. She is oppressing the people. And worst of all, she's locked all of the land in an endless winter. So nothing grows, nothing's thriving. It's cold and dark and dreary, and there's no hope. About halfway through the book, Aslan, the lion, begins to return to Narnia, and something interesting happens. The world begins to thaw. And so it's described like this. The children that are there start to notice that the rivers were no longer iced over, but they were starting to trickle, and then they flow, and then they start hearing, the sound of rushing water. They heard faint sounds of birds chirping, and then patches of green grass start to emerge up from underneath the white tundra. The sunlight starts peeking through the clouds. Then loads of snow start falling from the top of these trees, and branches and leaves begin to be visible, and then leaves start to sprout up on these barren branches. So as Aslan comes near, the White Witch's spell is being broken. It's fading away. Now, of course, for C.S. Lewis, Aslan represents Jesus. And the parallel is clear, that as Jesus is coming into the world, he's coming back into it in order to revive it, in order to restore it, in order to set it right. Now, one of Jesus' followers actually wrote about this. He wrote to a church, and he said, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. In other words, if you don't know who God is, if you've never seen him, look at Jesus, because he tells you everything you need to know about who God is. The firstborn of all creation, for in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, whether they're invisible or visible, whether they're thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him, listen to this, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. And through him, God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making, read this with me, peace through the blood of his cross. What we're celebrating here tonight and tomorrow at Christmas is God becoming a human. So this is the Creator wrapping himself up in his creation. This is the author inside the page. This is the artisan inside the paint. This is the architect inside the plan. He's entered into our created order in order to set things right, in order to make things new, to start a renewal. And that renewal is like spring. And what spring means is that winter is over. In other words, the arrival of Jesus, this baby in a manger, means that the thawing is already happening in our world, that it's already been redeemed, that everything has already begun to be set right, and it's irreversible through the work of Jesus. Jesus is making everything new. Now, there's some of you who are sitting here tonight saying, no, he's not. And I know that because I watch the news. And I know that because I live in the real world. And you obviously don't, because if you did, you know that he's not doing that. Certainly won't feel like that next week when we go back to work. It won't feel like that in March. It might feel like that tonight. I'm going to feel like that tomorrow when I'm sitting around the dinner table with my family. They're messed up, Kevin. You don't understand. Like, the brokenness is so deep in this world, there's no way that Jesus can be reconciling all things. Well, sometimes I think that we become skeptical of what God is doing in the world because either we don't know or we refuse to believe how he is doing it. The how is actually really important. And this is what's so interesting and compelling about Jesus coming, like in terms of his methodology. He came to set everything right, but he didn't use the methods that you or I might use. He didn't use things like violence or political reform or behavioral modification. He came to bring peace, not through those things, but through a different method. He actually came to bring peace at a far more profound, deeper level. Well, what do I mean by that? This baby that's lying in a manger that we're celebrating tonight, he'll grow up and he'll begin to proclaim a kingdom. And the way that people learn about this kingdom or know about this kingdom is through hearing about it. It's an announcement that's made, okay? So it's news. It's not really debatable. It's just like, hey, here's what happened. The kingdom of God is at hand. And you know what? Some of you need to hear this, by the way. It's not followed by a harsh command or by a threat. It's followed by an invitation. Jesus gives an invitation. Now, what kind of king gives an invitation? What kind of king comes in and is like, hey, new kingdom starting. Anybody that wants to follow can. If you're not interested, that's on you. I mean, that's not how kingdoms grow in size and scale. That's not how kingdoms are successful. I mean, where are the war horses? Where are the parades of victory? Where are the royal proclamations demanding that everybody bows down and submits to this king? Well, they're not there. Why? Because that wouldn't solve anything. Violence, political reform, behavioral modification, they don't solve anything. They can never actually bring peace. And that's because they don't deal with the real problem. They don't deal with our hearts. So the real problem with the world is that you and I live out of sync with its original design. Because we live out of sync with its designer. The human heart is cold, it's numb. Because a lot of us have experienced some of the effects of this endless winter, right? I mean, there's a lot of pain in this room. There's a lot of shame in this room. So we walk around this world just going through our day by day, and we're kind of unaware of who we really are, because who we really are is kind of clouded by our depression, and it's clouded by our loneliness. It's clouded by our anxiety. It's clouded by our insecurity. It's clouded by our grief. It's clouded by our chemical dependencies. Jesus says, look, take all that stuff. You just lay it down. Surrender your hearts. Stop walking away from me and start walking for me. That's what that scary church word repent means. You see the guy on the corner with the sign, it's like, repent. And you're like, all that means, all that concept is like, you're walking that way away from God. Come back. Turn around. Come back home. You can be reconnected with the good Creator King. You can learn what it means so that you're created in God's image. You can step out of the brokenness that you live in and you know it. You can step out of that brokenness and into peace. Those are all things that he made possible, as Paul says, through his death on a Roman execution device. So Jesus came to overthrow winter, if you take the C.S. Lewis analogy. He came to overthrow winter and then to begin the process of thawing our frozen hearts. Yep, kids, Frozen actually got this right. Only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart.
An act of true love will thaw a frozen heart.
Love will thaw. Love.
The gospel right there in Frozen. Okay, so this might be corny. I actually know that it is. But think about it this way. We look at the world and we say, look at everything that's messed up. I mean, how could anything really be solved? Well, the methodology of Jesus is one heart at a time. So the world unfreezes one heart at a time. It unfreezes a little more when you surrender your life to Jesus. And when you invite another person to become a part of his kingdom and surrender their life as well. See, we don't have peace in the world because we don't have peace with God. When we understand that we're created by him and for him. It gives us an identity. It gives us a purpose. It gives us a role in all of this. It actually allows us to see beauty. It breaks down the dividing walls that we put up, things like race and class and ideology, man-made things that separate us. The gospel, it just breaks all those things down. That's how this works. When you experience the shalom of being reconnected with the creator, designer, king, you start to see peace everywhere you go. So the question for all of us that this birth story initially raises is real simple. Are you at peace with God? Are you at peace with God? Because that is how he is remaking the world, through surrendered hearts. Crazy way to start a kingdom, right? That was a real effective way, actually, because it actually transforms people. It actually changes who we are and what we're about and how we live. Here's kind of how this works. Peace on earth begins in our hearts. And that remakes our homes, and that flows out into our neighborhoods and floods into our cities. See, peace on earth is not some ignorant bit of idealism. It's not a conservative idea. It's not a liberal idea. It's actually not a political idea. It's a gospel idea. And we are people of the gospel. We believe that the story arc of history is heading this way towards the reconciliation of all things, or Jesus will make everything right. And that's not a theory, because through the death and resurrection of Jesus, that's a promise. Promise that we, as his church, must stand in. Promise that feels very much alive tonight as we proclaim with one voice these lyrics that we sang, lyrics that we will sing. All hail his arrival, the God of creation. All hail his arrival, the God of creation. He's come, and he's come to bring peace. And you've seen it. You've seen peace. You see it all around you. You saw it this morning, some point during your day. You saw it last week. You've had these moments in your life where you have experienced shalom. You've experienced the peace of God. You've caught a glimpse of that day when everything will be made right. Through a reconciled relationship, through a healed body, but whatever it is, you've experienced it. You've seen it happening. We asked you to send in some pictures of where do you see it happening. We're going to celebrate some of those in just a moment as we sing. I want to talk to two groups of people just real briefly. There's some of you who are only here tonight because you came with your grandma or your uncle, and you don't really want to be here, and you're tired of listening to me talk, right? What I would say to you is that this birth story is actually good news. That's what the word gospel means. It is actually good news for you. That the brokenness that you live in every day, that you know about, that you would never even debate with me, that you know that it's there. Things are broken. Things are not right in your life. It can be reconciled. It can be restored. You can actually experience peace. Would you wrestle with that? In this Christmas season, as you wake up tomorrow, would you wrestle with that? That the brokenness around you, it can be healed through the birth of this child and the kingdom that he brings. And to the church, I would simply say these words. I want you to listen. There's just 7 of them. Maybe 8. There's more than 8. The world would dramatically change if the church would step up and live within the sentiments of this night. If we actually believe the words that we're singing, that the infinite God wrapped himself in flesh and he came to live among us, and he came to bring a kingdom, and he is coming to make all things new. He's come to give us second birth. He's come to raise the sons of earth. What if we actually believe that? It would change everything. So let's live in the sentiments of this night.